Sonic the Hedgehog, The Lion King. Two franchises that, for the multiple decades as they've been around, have had next to no actual connection to each other and have mostly just existed in their own lanes. One was a game franchise that started off with an iconic and beloved game that got insanely popular, but as it progressed over time and became a full-on franchise, the series gained more installments that fans viewed as decent, to mediocre, to downright awful. The other was a movie franchise that started off with an iconic and beloved film that got insanely popular, but as it progressed over time and became a full-on franchise, the series gained more installments that fans viewed as decent, to mediocre, to downright awful. Okay, maybe actually they're more similar than I thought, but nevertheless, despite their bumps, Sonic the Hedgehog and The Lion King have both been beloved franchises for generations, with both retaining a strong presence in the public eye and seeming like they'll be here to stay for quite some time. And with these solid reputations on their backs, it seemed like they had no reason to cross over into each other. That is, until 2024 rolled around. On December 20th of 2024, the movie-going audience was greeted with a simultaneous release of two additions to these money-making franchises: Paramount's Sonic the Hedgehog 3, directed by Jeff Fowler, and Disney's Mufasa the Lion King, directed by Barry Jenkins. While fundamentally different movies in their own right, these two films would end up dueling against each other for that year's Christmas box office crown title, and in turn spawning an entire plethora of internet-wide film discourse along with it. These were among two of the biggest film franchises at the time, so it only made sense that they would end up being the talk of the town in such fashion. Now, you would think that, hey, movies competing against each other on the same release date isn't a new idea. There have been plenty of examples in the past where two films quote-unquote dueled against each other, and most of these films are still liked, if not loved to this day, while the debates are mostly forgotten about. At best, you get something like Barbie vs. Oppenheimer, where it outright appreciates the two films simultaneously, and at worst, you would probably get something like Winnie the Pooh vs. Harry Potter, where one movie becomes a smash hit while the other doesn't perform nearly as well and gets mainly forgotten about by the public. So Mufasa vs. Sonic isn't really any different, right? Well, you'd be wrong. Because nuh-uh. In truth, Mufasa vs. Sonic has had much more of a negative impact than one might have realized if they hadn't actively experienced it. Even though the actual event came and went pretty quickly in the grand scheme of things, the effects of it were just ugly and unpleasant enough that I feel it's worth documenting and talking about. I honestly believe this debate was not only one of the worst examples of any movie debates with the same release date, but it also brought up some of the worst examples of bad film discourse in general. And that's saying a lot, given some of the other film discourses we've undoubtedly had to endure in the past. This is something I've been wanting to talk about at length for a long while now, and now that basically a full year has passed since it all went down, I feel like the dust has long since settled down enough to where I can fully speak my mind on how much of a dumpster fire this whole discourse was in hindsight. Let's not waste any more time here, and officially get to why I believe Mufonic not only dragged down Mufasa, but ended up dragging down Sonic 3 as well. This is the Mufonic Plague of 2024. Thank you to Silver for letting me steal his title idea. Roll it. First, before we dive into this whole train wreck, let me give a quick recap as to what happened to both the Sonic and Lion King franchises before this point, just to provide some background context. An abridged version of these histories, as you will. At the risk of sounding like an IGN article, it's no secret that the Sonic franchise has had its fair share of ups and downs over the years, and that includes its respective movies. While still a highly recognizable and beloved franchise all around, Sonic had yet to try its hand on the silver screen like so many other video game franchises had already tried, and mostly failed. Plans for an official Sonic movie have been kicked around for a long while, all the way back to 2014 before Paramount officially got their hands on the rights, and fans were rightfully skeptical as to how they pull off the Blue Rat in cinematic form. Come late 2019 when the first trailer finally dropped, and suddenly everyone felt like apologizing to Detective Pikachu.
Oh, come on.
After the immense backlash got so bad and outspoken, it forced the studio to delay the film by another few months to completely rehaul Sonic's design, and caused the animation studio to shut down due to how much money and time got crunched. Sonic the Hedgehog's debut film was officially released to the masses on February of 2020, to massive critical and financial acclaim. You'd think it would have been the opposite given how negatively the public reacted to the trailer, but no, people ended up being surprisingly way more on board with it than one might imagine. It gained over $300 million worldwide, well over its budget of a measly $85 million, and despite some criticisms of its story being a little bland for a Sonic movie, the reviews all around seemed to generally be pretty positive. It felt like for once in a long while, people were actually liking the possibility of a film franchise based off of a video game, especially after so many others had failed in the past. It was a brand new step for the Sonic franchise that practically nobody had expected to work as well as it did, yet almost nobody was complaining about it. And once Sonic 2 was greenlit and eventually released to the public 2 years later, it's pretty safe to say that people were now fully on board with this new franchise. On the other side of the story, we have The Lion King, a 1994 animated movie that, needless to say, was also a massively critical hit, both culturally and financially. Not only is it one of the most well-known Disney films to date, and still holds the title of having the most sold home video copies of all time, but it spawned sequels, spin-off shows, books, rides, a Broadway stage musical, an absolute boatload of merchandise, etc., etc. I shouldn't really have to state it any further than that. People fucking love The Lion King, and have continued to love it since its release in the 90s. Then, in September of 2016, it was confirmed that we would be getting a live-action Lion King remake down the road. No doubt riding off the critical and financial success of the 2016 live-action Jungle Book remake, Disney was now setting their eyes on giving the same remake treatment to one of their most popular films of all time. By this point, people were just starting to catch on that the live-action remakes were well on their way to being a huge yet detrimental money pit for Disney, but by then, it wasn't nearly severe enough to where people were fully apprehensive about it just yet. So there was a decent bit of hype, and the news of its announcement and production spread like wildfire. And when it finally came out in July of 2019, well, it was a financial hit. Very much so, actually. It was by far the most successful of the Disney remakes, to the point of grossing over $1 billion at the box office, far surpassing even what the original film had made, and even holding the title of highest grossing animated film of all time for 5 years straight before getting dethroned in 2024. So financially, it was a smash hit, but the critical response was... well, I don't think I need to sugarcoat it. People fucking hated this film. The other remakes before them were generally mixed, even if they were leaning towards negative more often than not, but looking at the online reviews for the Lion King remake, you would think this film was the next disaster movie with how practically everyone was tearing it to shreds. And even to this day, you still find people near universally agreeing on this being not only one of the worst Disney live-action remakes to date, but also the clear tipping point for how awful yet frequent these remakes are going to get in the future. Me personally, I admittedly do still kinda enjoy Lion King, and don't think it's the absolute worst, not by a long shot now that actual garbage like Mulan and Pinocchio exist, but I can acknowledge it is far inferior to the 2D animated classic by about 100,000 miles, and you'd be hard-pressed to find even a single person who even slightly disagrees. So long story short, without getting into specifics, by the turn of the century, both Sonic and Lion King were still highly successful franchises, but when it came to their live-action movies, one was significantly more beloved than the other, though it could have been equal. But no matter how the public felt about either of these franchises, good or bad, there was still more to come from the both of them. When it came to Sonic 3 specifically, the franchise was already planning on having multiple sequels from the start once the first film proved to be a hit. James Marsden, the actor for Tom, had already signed on for said multiple sequels by May of 2020, just a few months after the first film's release. And in February of 2022, just a couple months before Sonic 2, it was officially revealed that Sega and Paramount were already signing on for a third film, along with the spin-off series Knuckles.
Massive disaster!
Once Sonic 2 released, plans were already indicating that the third film would release on December 20th in 2024, so that release date was pretty much set in stone for them from day one. As for Mufasa, while it was stated back in 2020 that a Barry Jenkins-directed Lion King follow-up was in development, nothing about it was officially announced until much later. It was initially announced at Disney's D23 Expo in late 2022, and slated for release in July of 2024, but unfortunately for them, the events of the SAG-AFTRA writer's strike forced it, along with a slew of other unrelated films, to push its release date to December, which just so happened to land on the same release date as Sonic 3. So now here we are. When the initial announcement came out, you can bet there was going to be some talk about that release date clash. Funnily enough, the general movie critic audience didn't really seem to be all that interested in it. It was interesting enough to make note that they were releasing on the same day, but otherwise they were mainly just focusing on the individual films themselves. The Sonic movies were starting to have more of a positive reaction due to the massive success of Sonic 2 a couple years before, and Mufasa was just noted as yet another part of the Disney live-action remake line, only this time with Disney seeming to have somewhat learned from their mistakes and adding, well, actual facial expressions. But aside from journalists giving the news and keeping track of who was going to be ahead of who at the box office, it seemed like the critics themselves didn't really care too much about the debate. The general public, on the other hand, were all over it. You did have your share of moviegoers here and there that either just saw one film without caring about the other, or sometimes just saw both, but the one that was undeniably the most vocal was the Sonic fans. By this point, the Disney remake line was still going strong, chugging out what seemed like at least one or two of these things per year. Each one seemed to get more and more critically hated than the last, often for very good reason. But no matter how much shit people flung at them, one common factor among them was that they made complete boatloads of money. Jungle Book was a success, Aladdin was a success, Beauty and the Beast was a success, Dumbo. Okay, most of them were successes. And this new one was a prequel to The Lion King, undoubtedly the biggest offender in terms of box office numbers, considering what I just said about it earlier. So, with a popular film on the horizon releasing the same day as Mufasa, the Sonic fans, and just general Disney haters, were seeing this as their chance to finally make one of the remakes flop. And once December 20th of 2024 hit the calendar, the race was on. For the first week, Sonic actually started out with the lead, with a pretty strong start too. By the end of its first week, it had already gained just over $60 million in North American theaters, and was quickly counting. It isn't surprising either. The first Sonic movie had been a general smash hit, with a sequel gaining even more. So with how popular the films were getting, it really just seemed like a natural progression. And with it being on a budget of $122 million, these were very impressive numbers for the first week alone. Mufasa, on the other hand, was struggling at the start, having only a $35 million domestic return for the opening week. This was already bad enough, given that, even with the $25 million gap in competition aside, these were a far cry from the numbers the first film brought back in 2019 on its opening weekend. But now they would need a lot more ground to cover, given that the film had a much more expensive budget of $200 million. But then week number 2 came along, the Christmas weekend, and the tables started to turn. When the box office numbers for the holiday weekend rolled in, people quickly started to find out that Mufasa was starting to catch up. Actually, scratch that, it wasn't just catching up, it was dominating the weekend box office. Mufasa ended up gaining an additional $14 million in North American numbers and $18.8 million overseas, putting its domestic return at $64 million and its overall return at $197 million. This not only put it at numbers extremely close to its budget, but it ended up overtaking Sonic's $10 million domestic weekend, which granted was still overall ahead of Mufasa, but only time would tell whether those numbers would actually hold. But if we were just here to talk about the box office numbers on their own, this would be a very short and, frankly, very boring video. So let's lighten the mood by talking about something everyone can easily make fun of: marketing. Of course, like with any major movie franchise, they've got to have a marketing campaign to boost themselves up and get people to see their movie. And have them they did. On both sides, you got the usual stuff like trailers, posters, merchandise, sweepstakes, a couple popcorn buckets. Yes, there was a popcorn bucket for Mufasa, because of course there was. But one aspect in particular people seem to focus on was Mufasa's social media presence. Specifically, one tweet in particular. On December 22nd, early into the release date for both films, the official Walt Disney Studios Twitter account, I refuse to call it X, put out one of many promotional tweets for the Mufasa movie, as is usually expected. Except this one in particular happened to claim that Mufasa was the #1 movie in the world.
Mufasa the Lion King is the #1 movie in the world.
Tika, follow me, brother.
But that's not the interesting part. After all, marketing campaigns for film franchises claim they're the #1 movie in the world all the time, whether it's actually genuinely warranted or not. It's about as commonplace as every single book claiming they're the #1 New York Times bestseller. This is really nothing noteworthy. What is noteworthy is the reaction to it. Sonic fans noted that, at the time, Sonic happened to be getting a stronger start, with it seeming to be surpassing Mufasa in box office numbers in the US. So for Disney to make a tweet like this was kinda ballsy. So, of course, they respectfully voiced their concerns with this tweet by ignoring it as just another marketing tactic that means nothing, and I can't even finish that sentence. This is the Sonic fanbase. No shit, they were gonna be vocal about it. There were so many verbal outcries about this tweet. Everyone was clowning on it in any way, shape, or form. Whether it was quote retweeting it, flooding the replies with fact checks, making response memes, making fan art of Shadow the Hedgehog stopping on / killing the character Mufasa that would probably be enough to rival the Johnny Test hate art of yesteryear, or, probably the most prominent one, spamming the reply section with Shadow the Hedgehog gifs, to the point where the marketing guy actually had to start hiding the replies of it due to how frequent it was getting. As you may have guessed, this did not go unnoticed. Disney would later put out other similar tweets, some of which kept labeling it as #1 in the world, others claimed it was the #1 movie in America, and a couple of which claimed both titles at once. These were more or less treated the same, with the fact-checking and the spamming of shadow gifs and whatnot, but none of them had quite the same level of infamy that that first tweet had. Now, do I think Disney hiding the replies is corny? I mean, kinda, yeah. As annoying as I think the memes were, it would have honestly been less embarrassing on Disney's part to just ignore it and treat it as any other marketing tweet. This was just drawing even more unwanted attention to it. And it did also possibly serve as the first sign that Disney was in fact aware of the Mufonic debacle. As a side note, they would later officially acknowledge it in a Christmas promotion for the film called Yule Hog, which was just an hour-long video of Timon and Pumbaa sitting in front of a fire while occasionally quipping to each other. Compelling stuff, I know. And at one point, Timon makes this line.
I'm just saying, hedgehogs don't leave presents under your tree. Do meerkats? I don't know, but I know those guys don't.
But you know what? At least the #1 movie tweet had an actual basis for its backlash. It was an actual physical tweet that existed and was posted by the official Walt Disney Company, and it's one that anyone can look up today for proof it exists. Wish I could say the same about this next one. On Christmas Day in 2024, right-wing slop gossip magazine That Park Place posted an article in order to try to bash Mufasa in favor of Sonic 3, sparking and pushing around a rumor that Disney, in order to make sure their Mufasa movie beats out Sonic 3 at the box office, was bullying and straight up bribing movie theaters that were playing Sonic in order to force them to show Mufasa instead. That way, people would have to see Mufasa, and there was no way that Sonic would stack against them now. From the tone of my voice, can you take a guess as to how insane this sounds? Even if you set aside the fact of this being very much a source dude trust me situation, where there is not a single actual source of this really happening outside of the one right-wing slop article, and that it wouldn't have been a common practice in the film industry anyways, since it's been illegal from the literal 1940s until 2022, how in the actual fuck would this even work? Even if they had bought up movie theaters to show Mufasa more, that still wouldn't give more people the incentive to watch the movie just because it has more locations now. That's not how movie audiences work. You can display the film to as many theaters as you want and show the film as many times as you like, and it still wouldn't work if the movie looks bad to the audience. That's where the money comes from and what drives people to see your film in the first place. If a movie turns out to be terrible and or it's a movie not many people would want to see in the first place, then they wouldn't see it regardless of how many theaters it's playing in. Shit, it's not even like it's a move Disney would have needed to make in the first place, even if that weren't true, mainly because of the fact that they are motherfucking Disney. They have more than enough public presence in moviegoers' minds to not need to push aside competition like this. Their omnipresence in movie culture alone basically does all the work for them. Yes, Disney has had flops before, and would continue to have flops after this in the future, but it was almost never something that would seriously damage them in the long run, major film franchise or not. It would have been completely pointless, if not outright asinine, for Disney to try to force Mufasa in theaters instead of Sonic 3, since all that would have done is discredit the film and give the company bad publicity without a good box office run to show for it. You have got to be fucking kidding me. But, in the end, there had to be a victor. Throughout all the fan dueling, it was clear one of these franchises about funny talking animals eventually had to reach the top of the box office crown once and for all. And once the theatrical releases came to a close, the winner ended up to be Mufasa. Yep, that's right. After the boost they had on the Christmas weekend, Mufasa the Lion King ended up keeping its hold over Sonic 3 all the way through to the end. It was a close one too, at least in the US. Both of them were massive financial successes, and domestically they made around pretty similar levels, with Mufasa making over $250 million in the US compared to Sonic 3's $230 million. But internationally, it was an entirely different story. Despite ultimately being shown in less overseas countries than Sonic 3 was, Mufasa ended up making over $460 million internationally, completely blowing Sonic 3's mere $250 million out of the water. So when it came to total worldwide numbers, it ended up being a complete washout in Mufasa's favor. Better delete those shadow-stopping Mufasa memes before anyone notices. So now, here we are in the aftermath. 1 full year later as of this video's release. More Sega and Disney projects have come and gone, the Sonic movie plans are still going strong, and somehow another Lion King movie is planned to be in the works even though I legitimately have no idea what else they could get out of this franchise. And now that the Mufonic ordeal has long since officially ended, surely the fans have since calmed down and are now completely rational about it, right?
Nope.
Well, we still have half a video left, so you can guess the answer. Okay, here comes the ranting. So first off, one main issue I take with this whole Mufonic disaster is that for some ungodly reason, even a full year after this debacle seemingly ended, people somehow still care enough about this debate after the fact to use it in bashing the movie Mufasa, whether that be towards the film itself or the people who went to see it instead of Sonic 3. And look, if you did go to see Sonic 3 instead without seeing Mufasa as well, there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. The sole choice of seeing or liking one movie or the other is not the inherent problem here, whether you like Mufasa or not. It is extremely possible that a good chunk of people just wanted to see one movie over another without the idea of competing the two movies in mind. Hell, even back when this debate was new, I did see some glimpses of Sonic 3 fans actually being respectful to those seeing Mufasa, aka not being weird about another movie to prop up their own. No, my issue is that I fundamentally despise what Mufonic stood for, both as a general movie debate and as a practice of competing two movies against each other just for releasing on the same date. And it burns me up to see people looking back on it as a positive thing, like it was some sort of accomplishment that brought anything actually meaningful to film discussion. The way I see people still cling to it like it wasn't a misguided disaster that ended up harming both movies more than it boosted them is downright insane to me. And as of now, I've only really seen a small handful of people actually speak up about how annoying it was in hindsight. And if you don't mind, allow me to join them wholeheartedly. Genuinely, you could find a multitude of reasonings and excuses people have brought up as to try to justify Mufonic's existence, and all of them completely fall flat once you take more than a second to look at them. The first example of which being, oh, we need to make these movies compete to show the public that Sonic 3 is way better. Dude, I hate to break it to you, but nobody is arguing that. These two movies serve completely different purposes with completely different tones and audiences in mind. One is a cartoony CG hybrid action-adventure sequel with a major emphasis on comedy, and the other is a fully CG animated musical drama prequel involving realistic talking lions. The only comparison I could somewhat see besides the release dates would be that Shadow and Taka are both moody rivals to the main character with a tragic backstory, but even then, that's being extremely pedantic and has enough holes in it that it's not even worth discussing. And even if we lived in a universe where they were somehow similar, there's no reason as to why you can't simply enjoy one movie over another without making it into some sort of competition, other than for reasons that have nothing to do with the movies themselves. And believe me, we'll get to that later. If it's about popularity in the public eye, then Sonic really doesn't need Disney for that. So far, all three of the Sonic movies have proven to be extremely popular, ranking in millions of dollars with each new installment and spawning multiple sequels along with a spin-off show, with another one reportedly in the works. They have proven to have an extremely solid audience in their own right when it comes to being publicly popular, and I'm pretty sure nobody's bringing up Birds of Prey or Morbius in arguments to prove that point. And if it's about the idea of people preferring Mufasa over Sonic 3, then I don't know what to tell you other than it just comes down to personal film taste. People preferring a movie you dislike over a film you like is far from an alien concept, especially when, again, said two films have nothing in common other than their release dates. I promise you that general audiences seeing a Lion King movie over a Sonic movie is not a hard thing to grasp. Another excuse I hate is, we need to make the Disney remakes flop, so competing against Sonic 3 is our best chance to make Mufasa flop. To be honest, I kinda get the sentiment behind this one, as it is connected to a much bigger issue involving the state of Disney's onslaught of live-action remakes, and how a lot of them, most definitely including the 2019 Lion King, which Mufasa is a prequel to, are extremely hated for being inferior, watered-down copies of the original films, yet Disney still keeps making them because of all the money they make. So at least this one has a basis that I can understand. But it's still a shitty reason for bringing Sonic into it. Look, even if you wanted to make Mufasa and by extension the Disney remakes flop, using that concept to push Sonic up is a stupid idea to begin with, not just for the reason I described about them being different films, but also because of one word in particular: fan bases. When it comes to well-known film franchises that happen to have large fan bases, it's a common trend that discussions and debates about new film installments would completely dominate film spaces even if you yourself weren't actively looking for it. You see this all the time with pretty much any major film franchise, be it Star Wars, Dune, Marvel, etc., and the Sonic films are no exception. With this in mind, it was kind of already a no-brainer that the Sonic fanbase would be particularly loud over the third installment of their film franchise. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but you know Sonic fans. Once they see an opportunity for starting shit, they'll take it without question. And this excuse for the debate brought out some of the most obnoxious behavior I've seen in film discussion for a long while. From the very moment the release dates were announced online, you can bet people were clinging onto the notion of Sonic 3 winning as much as humanly possible, and it quickly got old fast. Even glancing about discussion about either movie quickly devolved into Sonic fanboys using Sonic 3 as a vessel to bash Mufasa, from spamming constant meme posts and videos with the same exact joke about Sonic or Shadow trampling Mufasa, to shutting down those who might be interested in seeing Mufasa, or getting angry over even merely suggesting Sonic might not win, to eating up the aforementioned articles from right-wing culture war magazines just for the sake of having Sonic possibly make a few extra dollars over a Disney movie. Again, I get the notion behind it, since the Disney remakes are an ongoing issue, but there comes a point where the cause of your debate completely stops mattering once you start making discussions about the film's toxic by shoving it down the public's throats and constantly bringing it up when it's not needed, especially by forcing out the same points over and over and over again to the point where you want to start ripping your own hair out. And normally this wouldn't be worth noting, since the Sonic fanbase and Disney adults are often two sides of the same coin in terms of toxicity, but in this case the Sonic fans were by far the more outspoken ones when it came to competing the two movies and being annoying about whatever movie they wanted people to see. By pushing this type of debate, no matter what your causes or intentions might be in making one bad movie franchise flop, what it really does is create a toxic environment where one side is being more obnoxiously smug than the other, to the point where even those that were never part of the debate to begin with would keep hearing about it ad nauseum while having it not actually accomplish anything meaningful in the long run. Case in point, the 2019 Captain Marvel vs. Alita Battle Angel debate. Another instance of people constantly propping up one movie to bash another. In this case, anti-woke trolls trying to use Alita Battle Angel to dump on Captain Marvel and make it flop because they were being crybabies about there being a female-led Marvel film. Now obviously one definitely had much worse intentions due to being much more fundamentally bigoted than the other, but at its basics, both pushed a toxic fanbase to force a debate between two unrelated movies to make one of them flop, which ended up not happening anyways in both cases, and quickly made discussions on these movies become toxic to anyone even setting foot near them due to one side being butthurt, obnoxious assholes about it. Combine that with the Sonic franchise already being known for having one of the most toxic fan bases in recorded human history, and you may be starting to see now why this isn't something that should be repeated. Hell, even with the fact in question about the two movies having the same release date, there are still ways to enjoy Sonic 3 over Mufasa without acting like an annoying prick over it to your echo chamber internet audience. Here, just for your convenience, I've made a comprehensive list on how to properly protest against Disney's live-action remake line. Step 1. Refuse to see them.
There is no step 2!
There, I did it without comparing them. I don't know how obvious this is to anyone that isn't a trend-hopping grifter slop channel complaining about how Disney's newest Star Wars project is pushing a woke agenda or whatever, but there does exist such a thing as just watching the film you want to see while simply not seeing the film you think is going to suck. You don't have to make a whole song and dance us versus them thing over it by spamming Shadow killing Mufasa memes, or bragging about the movie's box office returns. If you want people to see Sonic 3 because it's good, then just say that. Or if you want people to not watch Mufasa because it sucks, then just say that. You can promote or protest against a certain movie without acting like a dick about it and eating up right-wing slop feeding on your viewpoints. But by far, my least favorite excuse for trying to justify why Mufonic somehow had to be a thing with an ongoing effect is, Disney is a shitty company that does shitty practices behind the scenes, and I refuse to support them. So I'm seeing Sonic 3 instead as a way to spite Disney and stick it to those corporate bastards. That'll show them. Alright, so putting aside the fact that seeing a movie out of spite for something is not the same as enjoying said movie, and it's just generally a bad way to experience a movie in the first place, you're forgetting that Paramount is a shitty company too, right? Like, the amount of shitty things that Paramount as a company has done over the years, while not as outspoken and pronounced as Disney's, are still significant enough that they can't be ignored, such as laying off dozens of its employees, having a bad track record of lacking in Latino representation, whatever the hell is going on with their streaming service nowadays, and, most prominently in recent times, directly donating their money to Israel and pledging their support for them during the Israel versus Palestine conflict. They are just as guilty as Disney of directly funding shitty causes using the profits made from their films and their subsequent marketing, including the money made from the Sonic movies. And even if Paramount somehow didn't have these glaringly outspoken problems, they're still a soulless corporation that cares only about making as many profits as possible. They're no different from all the other soulless money-making corporations out there, including Disney. The Sonic films aren't some sort of indie project made by a smaller film company. They're a product of a massive corporation that recognizes this major film IP they own is making them a shit ton of money. Announcing that you're seeing one corporate movie out of spite towards another corporate movie says and does nothing. It's one thing to rightfully call out or even boycott a company for doing horrible shit that the general public might not know about. God knows Disney especially is guilty of this. But you can't claim you're sticking it to the shitty practices of one company by financially supporting another film company that openly does equally shitty practices. And I'm not saying this is a yet you participate in society thing, because I'm aware there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, and I'm especially not claiming that every single person who went to see Sonic 3 is a willing genocide supporter, because that would be dumb. I'm saying that people who see a Paramount movie while pretending it's a powerful statement with an effective message against Disney are fucking delusional. Paramount should not be given a free pass just because you like their movies better. And to those who are so adamant that your favorite movie makes more money than whatever other film you dislike, and that Mufasa making more than the Live and Learn movie somehow means we failed as a society or whatever, let me ask you this. When have box office numbers ever actually mattered? Like, in terms of how a movie is regarded quality-wise, when is it ever an actual point to bring up or intentionally try to boost the movie's box office numbers? Like that means jack shit to the actual quality of the film. Illumination's Minions was widely successful, making over $1 billion at the box office, yet you'd be hard-pressed to actually find anyone talking about this film in its own right nowadays, let alone unironically liking it. On the flip side, 2008's Speed Racer was a massive financial failure, and yet nowadays it's gained a massively strong cult following, regarding it as one of the most underrated movies of its time. Box office numbers do not determine a movie's quality or legacy. Yeah, Mufasa made more, yet in the end, both movies ended up being majorly successful, with both making consistent headlines as being among the highest grossing blockbusters of that winter. Not to mention, Sonic is, need I remind you, still an ongoing franchise with a fourth film on the way, and Disney is rumored to bring its 2D animation studios back. We did not fail as a society by letting Mufasa make more money in the long run. I'm pretty sure we'll be fine. Actually, speaking of money, it's really funny to me how so many people, mainly Sonic fanboys, were clamoring so hard for Sonic 3 to destroy Mufasa at the box office the very moment they were announced to be releasing on the same day, and were taking every opportunity to spam and boast as loudly as they could when Sonic started out with a stronger opening. Yet the very moment Mufasa started outgrossing Sonic and ultimately came out on top in the end, suddenly box office numbers magically didn't matter. Suddenly, you get a wave of these very same Sonic fanboys claiming that it doesn't matter to them which one made more money, that it was only about making the public see which movie was better, and that this was never about making these unrelated movies compete against each other for clout to make yourself seem like a good person. And it's like, dude, no, you've made your reasonings loud and clear. Backtracking is not going to hide it now. In a way, the best method I can use to summarize Mufonic is that it is the very antithesis of 2023's Barbenheimer. That was another instance where two completely unrelated movies were being compared to each other due to being released on the same day, yet the intentions and societal impacts for Barbenheimer and Mufonic couldn't be farther apart. Barbenheimer from the get-go was launched out of respect towards both films. It caused people to be interested in checking them out, whether separately or on the same day, brought about public discussion about them in ways that actually felt natural, and, at the end of the day, left both movies with a successful financial return and brought people together and giving an equal level of respect and appreciation to both films in their own rights. Meanwhile, Mufonic was born out of a place of poorly thought out spite, was fueled by an infamously loud and annoying fanbase that was insecure over their soon-to-be billion-dollar movie franchise, pushed insane rumors that weren't even true in the first place just to make the other side look bad, and, here's the kicker, didn't even work at achieving its fucking goal. It just goes to show that the so-called debate was a bad idea to begin with, due to just how much of it was founded upon bad intentions, and how much of it harmed both movies in the process more than it promoted them. Instead of actually boosting Sonic 3 over Mufasa like what it was supposedly trying to do, all it really did was spawn a bunch of annoying bad faith fights and movements from whiny fanboys clinging onto box office numbers, along with pushing a horrible, unhealthy message about seeing movies out of spite towards something and harassing those who see one film over the other, with Disney's biggest pushback crimes in this whole thing being hiding Twitter meme replies and a throwaway Timon line. It was a forced one-sided debate against something that wasn't even making it a debate to begin with. Mufasa won. Get over it. So, that's it. Like I said, this is something I felt strongly about for quite a bit, and now I'm just glad to have gotten it all out here. If there's anything I've said here that you disagree with or want to add to the conversation, go ahead and drop it down below. I'd be more than happy to hear it. But hopefully I've at least explained my stance here in a way that makes sense. And for the record, again, like I said before, If you went to see both films and competed them against each other when this was still going on, that in of itself is not a bad thing. Simply comparing two films, related or not, doesn't make you a jerk for doing so. Hell, I do it all the time, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well. It's more just the general attitude around Mufonic getting out of hand that I had a problem with, and it felt significant and widespread enough to where I felt I eventually had to speak up about it. Comparing and competing two or more films against each other is always going to be a thing, especially if said films happen to be twin releases with each other, and I'm positive there will be many more examples down the road whether they're as big as this one or not. I just hope that by then, people will have a better idea what to look out for so we don't have another disaster like this one again. But hey, it does make for a fun kind of topic to research, so at least we can get that out of it. Maybe I can do another one of these in the future if this one does well enough. Maybe I'll do one on friggin' Saw Patrol if anyone remembers that. Who knows, anything really goes with this idea. Alright, that's enough for me today. I'm gonna go and rewatch the original Lion King or something. I don't know, I feel like that makes for a good breather after all that. Because goodness knows I need one. Thank you, and good night.
Maria! No. Huh?
Sayonara, Shadow the Hedgehog. By the way, the only reason this is happening is because Disney bullied theaters to have more